Hi everyone again. I hope you had a very nice break. You have something tasty for lunch, and the atmosphere here in the studio is getting better and warmer because we have a panel discussion here. Some of the speakers you already met in the last few days, and some of them you will have the opportunity to listen after the panel. So today here with us is Riina Helstrom, Daniel Mezick, Olaf Lewitz, and Miljan Bajić as a facilitator of the panel. Welcome everyone. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, and thank you for the invitation.
We are very super excited to have you here today. Some of you have been to Belgrade, some of you haven't been to Belgrade, but this is one of the way how to gather you together, and hopefully next year we'll be in person. So when we were discussing the subject and the subject of this panel, there were so many interesting ideas, and I'm sure that our audience will be very excited, and it is very excited to hear what you have to say and what you're going to talk about.
All right, great.
We will have a Q&A session. Miljan, do you want me to follow the Q&A, or do you want you to do that? The Q&A on Match About.
I can do that. Can you guys hear me okay?
If you want, yeah, we can hear you. If you want, I can also do that, but we can talk about it later. So we have a Q&A section within Match About where people can ask questions to our speakers and panelists during their sessions. So when time comes, I can do that, or you, either way.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So just to give people a little bit of background on the topic, stop butchering and boxing agile. I know all three panelists, and I'll be facilitating discussion here. And we were talking or exchanging emails as far as like what we would call this discussion, and we were going back and forth and with some of the things that we would discuss. And I suggested this, stop butchering and boxing agile, and it seemed like everybody agreed that along the theme of what we wanted to discuss, that this described. So just to clarify, what I mean, or what we mean by butchering, is to ruin something. In English, when we say, you know, they're butchering the process or butchering the system or whatever it is, it means to ruin. So a lot of us have been discussing how agile has been ruined to some extent over the, like, you know, we follow too much processes, or we're dogmatic about certain things or frameworks. And the boxing part is that it seems like there's a framework for everything these days. So that's the theme, or that's the idea behind the theme. I've come up with three questions for this panel. We'll time box each question to 12 minutes, and then we'll go from there. I'm good friends with each of these panelists. I think they're great people as well as great agilists. So I'm looking forward to this. So maybe to start with the first question, as I said, you know, a lot of what we've seen over the last 5-10 years is that, you know, agile and the way that, you know, people that wrote the Agile Manifesto intended agile has been kind of butchered in a way. We still see organizations that are struggling. We still a lot of people that are disengaged at work. We see a lot of people that are unhappy. So from your perspective, in what ways are people and organizations abusing agile? We'll go Riina, Olaf, Daniel, maybe in that order, or you guys can self-organize.
Yep.
Awesome. First question, do we need to say something about ourselves, or do people know enough about us to, do you want us to say quick 2 words what we do?
No, I don't think so.
Let's go into this.
Okay,
into good. Riina here, Helsinki, working like an agile coach a lot. We're going to start with, I try to kind of boil it down to 3 things, not to empty the jackpot, so leaving something to talk about with my fantastic panelist colleagues here. I see a lot of agile transformation going on where everything is a framework or a methodology or a recipe. And there are both clients and corporations that think this way. And then there are a lot of coaches and consultants that also, it's an easy sell. You go in and say, here's a framework, here's a roadmap, this is how we should do it. And being in this agile bubble myself now for 12 years, I'm still wondering, how is this possible? there's so much talk about agile values. There's so much talk about the empirical process. There's so much talk about that this is a human-centric, invitational change. And still we're having conversations about, here is a recipe, here is a framework, this is how you do it, here's a roadmap, this is what it costs. So waterfall implementation of something that should be evolutionary change. This is not an implementable method. It's not, there is not a ready state for an agile organization. So these are things that I would like to kind of point out. And I think that another thing kind of leads into another thing of, it's really not about agile at all. Agile is just a word for what we are trying to do with customer value creation. Agile is just a word for trying to start working in a human-centric, self-organized, incremental way. So sometimes we might lose the track of what this really is about. And to be able to go this way, I think what is really important is how people change. And this is something that I see over and over again by some requests coming in and also in the field, is that people believe that just when you sit on a training for 4 days, you are now somehow transformed into an agilist. What I would like to kind of bring up is that people change by creating new habits and new mental models. And to help people do that, they need to be able to make sense of what's going on. I believe in people, and I can see over and over again that they are happy to start changing if it makes sense. If it's smart, they will start changing, and they will even start helping you change. And what's remarkable is that the willingness, there is nothing such a thing as change resistance. But when it makes sense for people, and when they get some support for trying things out, they will start working this way, where and when it makes sense. And the third boxing that I would like to kind of point out here is that this is something for IT or software only. I'm happy that that is starting to diminish now, but 12 years ago when I started with Agile and started talking about Agile in management and HR, I was kind of laughed to. You know what, that's software. And the software people wanted to own agility and were laughing at, oh, they are trying something in marketing or other functions. But right now, what we're seeing over and over again in a lot of companies is that this touches a lot of functions. It touches a lot of dependencies in the organization. And there are a lot of other functions that can either enable agility in the parts where it makes sense, or they can block agility. So for example, performance or reward are things that really quickly need to be addressed if we start working in an agile way. And you know who are working with performance and reward? HR people. That's my turf, agile HR. So that's where we can start impacting those.
Do you think then maybe we can switch, but I think something to think about is how much HR is contributing to that butchering and boxing of things because of lack of understanding.
Very much. Happy to hand over. So
yeah, Olaf, what are your thoughts? And feel free to kind of, it doesn't have to be structured, as I said, like you guys can jump over, jump in.
Well, you know us, we tend to follow orders and be very diligent and orderly and stuff like that. At least at the beginning of conversation to gain trust. You said something about that Agile is not about reaching a state. And I think this is the main misunderstanding that people have, that there's the old way of working and there's the new way of working, which is Agile. And that totally taps into our, I don't know, probably evolutionary trait of having this us versus them mentality. So we think we believe to have the new Bible, the new book, and then everybody who doesn't believe in it is an enemy, right? And you see this between the Agile people and the non-Agile people. One of my favorite Agile quotes is by Martin Kearns, who said, every time somebody says that's not Agile, a fairy dies. That speaks to the, don't label things as Agile or not Agile. That's not the point. Agile is about a way of changing, driven by the people. Riina already explained it. I'm not going to repeat that. So that's one mistake, that people don't define what they actually want to achieve with the Agile way of changing. So they do not define what they want to actually get out of it, which means they don't define its success. So they can't measure if they're succeeding or failing. And if somebody comes along who doesn't like it, they just ditch it. They're also abusing it because they don't get how it is supposed to work. Like when people ask me, can you help me make my company more agile, which is usually company leadership I'm talking to, my first question to them is, okay, yeah, I might be able to do that. So is the current company, the current organization you have, is that the result of your leadership? And some of them quickly say yes. And then I say, okay, and the company you want instead, what kind of leadership is that going to need? And then they look at me and start thinking, because you don't change a hierarchical system in any other way but from the top. And if we do this on the team level and stuff like that, and then we are wondering because the management is still working the old way or still thinking the old way, and then some middle managers want support and some middle managers want the other thing, and then we get lots of polarization in the organization, but no collaboration, no change, and yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing I want to say about this boxing, I think this is a blessing and a curse. I think it's nice that some things come in a box and that they're actually easy to implement. And I've been to companies who, for instance, to just name one of these elephants in the room, who have been implementing SAFe, and they are really, really, really a lot better off than they were before, or they would ever be, hadn't somebody just said, okay, let's do this. And if they then actually start to evolve, that might work, and it might actually become something agile in the end. But it's not the thing, right? What we always forget is that all of these things, you could say Scrum or SAFe or Kanban or Post-its, whatever, right? They're all tools. And the manifesto starts with, it's about interactions and human beings over processes and tools, and all the other agile things we sell are tools. And it's sometimes very, very good to remember that. And that's not just SAFe. All of the things we sell are tools. Even coaching is a tool.
Great. Dan, what are your thoughts? Dan? You're on mute, I think. Double check.
Sorry about that. First of all, let me just say what a pleasure it is to be with all of you here right now. Really enjoying myself. So the question, as I understand it, is, in what ways are people and organizations abusing Agile? I think a more interesting question might be, in what ways is Agile abusing people in organizations? I think that's an interesting flip of the question in a way. Now, if we think about it, there's no change at all unless there's change in decision rights. And Scrum certainly sets that up. If we're using Scrum, there will be changes in the way decisions are made and who makes them. So I ask the folks that are listening and participating, have you implemented the Scrum decision rights? Because if you haven't, there could be a lot of dissonance and misunderstandings and confusion. And Olaf
maybe
spoke.
then just to jump in, like, I'm familiar with what you mean by decision rights, but maybe just to give people an example, like what Dan means is like, do you truly have product owners that have authority to make decisions without checking with somebody? Do you have Scrum Masters that are truly, servant leaders that are serving their teams? Like, so I think, right, Daniel, that's what you're alluding to when you say decision rights.
Sure. So let's tell a story about that. For the product owner to be successful, everyone must respect his or her decisions. Have we all agreed to that before we implemented the Scrum thing? Because if we haven't, we're going to be negotiating in the air after we took off. That doesn't make any sense. So we better figure out this. So when most people get fired, the first thing that happens is there is a reduction in their decision rights and their authorized decision rights. And this is the kiss of death, and everyone knows it. So everyone is highly triggered by any reduction in their authority to decide. So, the testing folks, the PMO, architects, managers, they're all triggered. So, I think this is the reason why we have this really, really weak implementation of Scrum around the world. And it starts with what Olaf said. Let's have a real conversation about what we all agree to before we get underway. So this is something that I advocate for, and it's painful, but wouldn't you rather experience the pain now instead of having to lose a limb or an essential organ? You know, I mean, really, is this what you want to do? You know, let's all get real about this. We've been at this for over 20 years. We're supposed to have wised up by now. So I'm going to stop and just let you know. I give back my remaining time to Miljan.
Yeah. So maybe we have another minute or two, but I think it's interesting also the way that you said how is Agile abusing people, and I think the first thing that I thought of is that saying "fool with a tool is still a fool" in a sense. So.
Yeah.
So like, it's what we make out of it. It's what we interpret it. It's going back to what Riina is saying, what we make sense of what Agile is. And I think, boxing things and having examples, it's like when SAFe becomes a prescription that every organization is taking without context, that becomes dangerous, right?
Yes.
But using SAFe and looking at the patterns and saying like, okay, why is this here? Why is that? How would I apply it in my organization? That's probably, a healthier and less butchering way to apply some of these Agile practices towards, better business outcomes.
Can I just quickly jump on Dan, your lovely turnaround of that question? How is Agile butchering or misinterpreting how people are working? I, for example, have an example of a person who went to a training, and he sat there and he was so angry. He was so angry. He said, "This won't work." And I said, "That's all right. I'm not here to make this work for you." And I was asking, "What are you working with?" He was a certification manager for a technology that was certified in the European, some kind of a body that then came back with certifications that they could use this technology. And I said, "You are so waterful, my friend, and you should be waterful. You should have all the documentation ready before sending in that to the certification body. You should have checked that everything is okay. You're not certifying technology in an Agile way, so it's all right. You don't have to change your way of working, but it's really good if you start understanding how these product development dudes and dudettes are working, because they're doing that incrementally, and that ends up on your table when you're certifying that." So also understanding where it makes sense and where it doesn't make sense, and are open to different kinds of ways. Just wanted to say that.
And then dudette, that's a technical term in our industry, right? The dudette.
So, no, I mean, maybe we can come back to some of this, but I did want to move to the second question. Recently, I was part of a discussion group and with Ron Jeffries and some of the other people on a chat. And, something that resonated with me and that, Ron specifically mentioned is like how a lot of developers hate Scrum, how a lot of people hate Scrum, not necessarily because of Scrum, but the way that it's implemented in organizations, that it's abusing. And this is a good example where the Scrum is abusing people in a sense because of the way that's implemented, whatever decision rights aren't implemented in a way that they were intended. So from your perspective, a lot of times we look at Scrum as a marketing ploy. A lot of people call Scrum as a marketing BS because that's somebody's perspective, and there's a large consensus, especially in some circles. So what are your thoughts? How do you, or maybe do you see Scrum marketing BS, or is there, what are your thoughts from maybe developer standpoint and how some developers see? I know we have a lot of developers in this conference. So
who should go first?
Yeah.
So let's go with Olaf, Daniel, and Riina.
Okay.
Thank you. So I started working in an Agile way when I was a developer. That was more than 20 years ago, when in 98, I think it was, we started reading about XP, and we looked at, oh, finally somebody has written down how software development actually works, in contrast to all the engineering bullshit that was prominent at the time. So I am more than 50 years old, but I'm actually an Agile native. I've never written software to a written specification. I've never worked on a project with a Gantt chart. But yeah, and I know this absolutely. Like developers I talk to these days, they come like, "Hey, Scrum, no." My funny quote around that is, "If Agile is the solution, I want my problem back." Because and this is alluding to what we talked about before, Agile is being shoved down people's throats. Like to me, Agile is very similar to Lean. The key difference to me is Agile is driven by the people doing the work. That's key. Even if Riina is totally right, you can use it outside of software, but it's not a management initiative to change the way other people work. It's an initiative that started with the workers, with the software developers who wanted to devise different ways of working and found out what worked better. And it happens that some of these principles work in marketing too, and in other areas. And my take on this is, as soon as we leave this, it's driven by the people doing the work. As soon as we lose touch from that, we start moving towards exploitation. Like when you look at Jeff Sutherland's book, Twice the Work in Half the Time, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't have a chapter on 4 times the pay for the developers. And I'm by no means a Marxist, but why if developers speeded up their process that much, shouldn't they be allowed to go home before lunch with twice the salary than before? And nobody's having that conversation, but that's exploitation. And yeah, we want increasing productivity, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it needs to be driven by the people. And there's another aspect I just want to mention quickly. And I am not actively developing software anymore, so I would be interested to talk with Ron and other people who still do that. But my impression when I look at code and when I look at how developers work these days, it's a lot more fragmentarized. What's the word? Like there are lots more different roles. Back when I was a developer, we tried to bring front-end and back-end developers together so that we could have cross-functional teams and everybody could work on everything in the system. Obviously, that doesn't work in every kind of system, but that was the general aim. And now I see so much specialization. I see so much individual work. It's very rare that I see an Agile team where developers actually work together, where they actually share their code base, where they sit in front of one computer, and where a team is more than the sum of its parts actually happens, because they all work alone. They all pull single tasks from the backlog or from the sprint board, and that's not real Scrum. And then when or Scrum doesn't really work with that. And then when I come in and say, hey, why don't you collaborate? Some developers go, no, I don't want to work that way. I want to have my task. I want to have my thing. I want to deliver my own. I want to code in private. And I don't know if that's a trend.
I don't think it's a trend, and maybe we can. I think, especially here in the Balkans, in some other areas, like if you've gone through school and you've coded that way, that's the case. But like I also teach in university, and when I work with developers these days, like a lot of them don't think about it that way. So I think it's mindset of developers. It's varied. I don't think it's. But then you were shaking your head earlier to something that Olaf said. I want to know, or maybe you were stretching your neck.
Well, way back when in America, there was a company called RCA, and there was the RCA dog, and the icon was he would be hearing his master's voice on the photograph, and he would cock his head like this, and that's what I was actually doing. So I don't want to talk about social philosophy or Marxism versus capitalism or any of that. Here's what I want to discuss. The question is Scrum bad? Is Scrum just marketing bullshit? The answer is not enough information to answer. So let's unpack this for a minute. There's a religion in the world who has this concept of something called right livelihood. It's about the ethics of earning a living, right? That you shouldn't be harming people in your work. The world should be better off. People should be better off as a result of your work. I subscribe to that idea. So, I have a question for the audience. How many of you have read the Scrum Guide from the beginning to the end at least 4 times? And most of you probably have, right? Okay. Now, if you've read the Scrum Guide, then you know that it says that the Scrum Master leads the organization through its implementation of Scrum in the following ways. And then it discusses service to the organization, the product owner, the team, and so on. Okay. How many of you have discussed the Scrum Guide with the authorizing executives, the ones who authorize the budget? Just think about it for a minute. Have you ever had that conversation? And the second thing is, you're supposed to be a leader of the implementation of Scrum in your organization, but you don't have enough authority because you never asked for it. Okay, so you never asked for a conversation with the executives to discuss and socialize the Scrum Guide and the decision rights for the Scrum Master specifically there. So is Scrum bullshit? Yeah, when it's presented as something that's going to change your company and then it doesn't, it's bullshit because you haven't implemented the decision rights in Scrum, because you haven't had the conversation with the people who matter, the ones who have budget authority. Okay.
Dan, maybe just to expand on this, you talk a lot about inviting leader. You even wrote a book on inviting leadership. So this goes both ways, right? How many leaders have you seen invite Scrum Masters to have that conversation?
Well, this is the thing. Okay, so I'm just going to say something, then I'm going to stop because I know we're short on time, generally speaking. Okay, the entire industry is organized around transactions, not transformations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the purpose of a system is what it does. Posiwid, Stafford Beer, go look it up. POSIWID. Posiwid. The purpose of a system is what it does. And the Agile industry and the Scrum subsection of that is great at generating transactions. Unbelievably great. The transformations aren't being generated. And the reason why is because our language gets lost in translation at sale time. So nobody uses that Scrum and Agile language during the sale time. What they do is they go better, faster, cheaper, quicker. We'll be able to tick all these boxes. It's going to cost you 500,000. And they go, okay, great. And you'll do everything. And the whole industry says yes. So here's the biggest problem. The industry, the largest industry voices, the so-called prominent voices, sometimes we call them thought leaders, sometimes, and then the institutions that will not be named, are not setting the pace on this. We should be educating executives about what it's going to take to support the Scrum. And I'm just going to conclude and say that this question, is Scrum bad, is Scrum bullshit? That is an ethical question. Anytime you see the word should, that is an ethical question. We're talking about ethics here. So I yield my remaining time. I hope I've stimulated some people with my words.
I think so. And maybe, Riina, I know that when you and I spoke, you said that the Scrum Guide had a huge impact on you. And so maybe how would you say, like from your perspective, the reason that I said, BS2 is a lot of times we are selling those certifications, including myself. I work with organizations that are, about transactions, then transformations. So what would you like to say, Riina, on this?
I'm a bit more optimistic and positive. So let's end on an optimistic and positive note here. So I love Scrum. I love the background of Scrum. I have been trained and been learning from Jeff Sutherland, who I think is a remarkable man, who's been sharing something with us that they've been doing for tens of years. And that has been starting to spread. And it's spreading because there's sense in that. They're spreading because it's useful. And of course, there's an industry now that is selling that in a certain way. But I would like to say that Scrum is changing quite many lives, and not just in software, because I see people, they don't want to come in and do rubbish work with bad collaboration, with bad output, if they have some kind of a practice that they can start using to like what they're doing, do that together, improve as they go, and see the customer who is happy. I've been talking with people who've never gotten customer feedback before they started working this way, and they actually brought in customer feedback. Not maybe after each sprint, but at least they heard from the customer. So there's a lot of good stuff here. But the point is, this can be the worst micromanagement structure in a waterfall Tayloristic system. So Scrum can be really badly misused. So, I mean, Scrum and Agile are now mainstream. There will be bad Scrum, there will be bad Agile, there will be rubbish organizations doing rubbish Agile, and there will be brilliant Agile organizations really getting it, really improving and doing this in a human-centric way. So I think that the question of is Scrum good or bad, it's an irrelevant question. Scrum is Scrum. Mm-hmm. It depends on how you use it. It depends on how you improve it. And then it's either useful or not, just like anything.
Great. No, and thank you all for answering that, because I think it is important to have that discussion too, because as I said, there is a huge group, that thinks otherwise and has negative experiences. So I thank you for shedding the light on both good and bad. So the last question, where do we go from here? How do you see Agile movement evolving past the current paradigm? We'll start with Daniel.
Oh, I'm going to speak very briefly, just so everyone else has a chance to talk. In the ideal world that I envision, we all agree that we will first have a conversation with and educate executives about the Scrum Guide and what it's going to take to support the things that it says about the distribution of decision rights among the product owner, the Scrum Master, the team. The support is not happening. So the Scrum Master is a clerk. The product owner is a kind of Uber clerk. And the team is kind of left with, Agile or Scrum in name only. We could change that dramatically by first educating and getting executives excited about supporting the Scrum, and tell them the 17 great things that are going to happen with 3 or 4 months if they'll just do a few things that are difficult, like supporting the boundaries around the decision rights by role. Okay, if we do that, we go dramatically forward and we have a possibility to be world changing beyond the world of work. Okay, if we keep going the way we're going now, not educating executives, and just getting along and going along and selling them what they're buying, then we get to keep doing what we're doing. So there we go. That's what I think.
Great. So maybe this leads into a couple of things that I've discussed with Riina, which is the education and how we learn is getting decentralized. And also, when we talk about training leadership from an HR perspective, a lot of times, at least the question or the answers that I get when I ask the question of can we have some time to even train, coach, whatever it is, it's like we don't have time for that. So from your perspective, and in line with the question where we go from here, what are your thoughts on
where is Agile going?
Where is Agile going?
Can I be a bit unconventional here? I would say I don't care. I don't care where Agile is going, because Agile is, there are a lot of companies. It's an evolution of companies. It's an evolution of the paradigm of how to run a business, how to deliver value, how to run hospital service, whatever. We've got a new paradigm coming in, and those companies that will succeed in this and do it gracefully will succeed. Others will die. And if we start doing this, if I look at a lot of these Agile coaches that I know since 20 years back or 15 years back, most of those will have full on work 20 years from now. They will be fully booked because so many companies are needing help with this. Some will get help from people who know what they're doing and follow these guidelines and values. Some will get help from others who are not. And that is a result that you can see that in the result. So it's just an evolution. What Agile, we can do it gracefully or not, and let's do our best. And we can't save them all. There's going to be a lot of people working as Agile coaches or having Agile certifications, whatever. We are doing certifications as well. We are doing it a bit in a different way, but anyway. So it's going where it should go. It's kind of a Zen thinking.
Yeah.
The world is
whatever happens. Yeah, whatever happens is the only thing that can happen. Yeah. That's good. Can I add one thing? I want to say what the biggest problem in Scrum is, and here's what it is. if you don't implement the decision rights, you still get a 10 or 15% bump in everything you're measuring. And that's really okay for most companies. And that's probably the biggest problem today.
And maybe let's come back to that. I agree. And essentially, then we've talked about this too. Like, hey, just have people do Scrum. We don't have to, we'll have proxy product owners. We'll have Scrum Masters that only facilitate. And that's good enough. And maybe what we can come back to, maybe that's the necessary step. Keeping the positive team. Maybe that's what we need before we actually truly, but to come back to what's next and where we go from here. Olaf, what are your thoughts on where is Agile going? Because
Riina already stole the unconventional idea. With the way you originally phrased the question, I would say I have doubts that we actually have one movement at the moment. We are definitely moving in lots of different ways. I think in effect, that's a good thing, because the world is becoming more and more complex and there are more and more differences. And as Riina already said, there are lots of different Agile coaches and other people who support organizations in change. And yeah, it's an evolution. What I would like to see is some coherence about we're doing this with the people, for the people, ideally driven by the people. And when I say the people, I'm not talking about People's Republic or anything. Again, this is not politics. I'm talking about change driven by the people doing the work, not other people imposing, not the external person exposing, you should do Scrum like this, not the boss imposing, you have to work twice as fast, not the one department imposing on the others. We are Agile now, so you have to be too. So my hope is, and this is not just limited to the Agile space or the organizational improvement space, like we have so much polarization on the planet at the moment, or polarization on in humanity, and we have a planet to save. To talk about something important, recently read a quote by somebody who said, the way we are dealing with climate change is as if we put all our children in a bus, knowing that it's going to crash with a 98% of probability. And in order for that to change, we need to work together. We need to work together with exactly the people we don't like and exactly the people who have a different opinion from what we have now. And I think we have a fairly good history in the last 20 years, at least some of us, in this little petri dish of Agile, who have learned how to do that, who have learned how to actually connect opposing sides, how to actually bring differences together, how to overcome polarizations, how to move beyond this bullshit stuff. And I think if we do more of that, what I would like to see is that this actually spills over from the organizations into society, and that we learn to overcome some of these differences that keep us from working together at the moment. Because, yeah, well, we won't suffer from climate change given our privilege and age. But when I'm looking at our children and grandchildren and at the way the planet is already punishing us now for how we treated it, I think that's something where we can share the learning of the last 20 years and bring it to fruition.
Yeah, and maybe I'm looking at, there are only 2 questions, and I don't know how much they're relevant to what we've been discussing. Maybe we can, I'll read the 2 questions and then you can decide with the 5 minutes that we have. How can Agile be applicable to e-learning production? And the other one is, there maybe a better mindset than Agile? So is there maybe better mindset than Agile? How can Agile be applicable to e-learning production?
Let me do that in 30 seconds.
Sure.
Yeah. E-learning production, you've got a big program that you want to do. You do that incrementally. You bring people along who are the learners, you design those modules with you, and you get feedback from them. Is this good or not? You test them with a couple of people or a couple of groups first to see what the feedback is, and the feedback drives your iterations and your product development step by step until you have a ready product that works really well. 30 seconds done.
And then you keep improving it. About the
Or
mindset
move
thing,
on to the next thing, right?
I think this whole mindset discussion is one of the big dangerous ones in the Agile community. Like I'm increasingly seeing people who use the word mindset to dismiss somebody who they think is wrong, and I think it's highly patronizing to assume that what's going on between another person's ears is less valuable than what's going on between your own ears. And I don't think that the Agile mindset is better than any other. I think the mindset that stops comparing mindsets is probably the one we should strive for. And so to ask which is even better is to me is going in the wrong direction. So try to not compare in terms of value, better or worse, your mind to another person's mind. Try to understand how they think and try to find ways to collaborate with them in order to create what you want to create.
That's a really good message, and I think it applies to what you said earlier about the general like global kind of crisis or problems that we tend to always judge. And I know we're out of time in a way here, but it also goes. All of this is related to our consciousness and how we perceive the world and what we make of the world. So
yes,
that's something that I think we all can empathize with others, better understand other people's problems, and see how in a context. What would you like to say in closing, given the three questions, given what we've discussed? Riina.
I want to say thank you for spending 30 minutes with us. Thank you for starting to think about these things and be mindful of other people, and hopefully see you around in the Agile circle soon. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Olaf?
Yeah, same. Thank you for everyone who stayed with us and stayed curious. Thank you, Miljan, for hosting us. Thank you, Jelena and the team for the invitation. And Miljan, what you just said towards the end sounds like an emerging topic for the face-to-face conversation we'll have next year in Belgrade. Like about consciousness and saving the world and whatever.
And let's just have an Agile party. I mean, we haven't partied for 2 years. Let's have a proper party.
Yeah, count me in.
No better place to have a party than Belgrade. So, Daniel, what about you? What would you like to leave us with?
Hey, it's my pleasure to be here with all of you. There's so many lovely people in this community and industry. How can we get a little bit better this year? That's the challenge question that I leave everyone with, and I look forward to doing that with you all. Yeah. So thanks.
All right, great. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Hi guys, we really enjoy it. I know that we really didn't answer the question what would happen to Agile in the future, and that was not really the point of it. What is important that people realize that they need to change something and they want to do it. So is Agile the best way or not? Who knows? I agree with you, Riina, that perhaps next year theme would be Agile party. I'm not even sure how that party would look like, but we are good to try and we are ready. So hopefully next year we can meet in person. And I'm sorry that we didn't have more time. I should have planned at least one more session to discuss it, because now we need to finish and it's just getting started to be more and more interesting. Thank you very much for this opportunity to hear from you, and thank you for accepting this invitation and for being part of this event with us. And as I said, I'm expecting you here in Belgrade next year.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, bye guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.